Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Happy Sunday to everyone out there. We're excited to welcome you to the conversation with the acclaimed critic and connoisseur of opera, Patrick D. McCoy. Patrick, thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me, Kofi, Victoria. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Yes, the pleasure is ours. I like to generally start with a couple of housekeeping items, but I do want to say that, it is such an interesting way that Patrick and I met a couple of years ago in DC, and we'll get into that sort of origin story. But just to give you all a little bit of background about us and who we are at DictionBuddy, what we do. Our mission. Oh, hi, Gary. I see you in the comments. Nice to see you. Thank you for coming out and supporting. Really appreciate that. So our mission is to make the songs and the music of the world more accessible to everybody. And the way we've done that is by creating a platform that makes it easy for people to do that and very affordable. So right now we actually have a very big announcement. We've actually passed our 10th language. We just added Korean to the library. So that's going to be a very interesting addition to this this mission and this project that we've created. So you can find out more about us at DictionBuddy.com. I'll put the website there for you. And you can find us on the social platforms, Instagram and on Facebook. So that's it about us. Let's now dive into the conversation about Patrick and what it's like to have a critic's lens on opera. I've always been fascinated with seeing opera as someone who is like an expert in a sense, right? Someone who knows and has such a wide degree of expertise with the art form. So I'd like to start with your origin story. Like, tell us how you got started and where it all began. I'd love to start from there.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again, Kobe, for the wonderful introduction. My musical origin really started in the church. The church was the focal center, the cornerstone of my musical interest. But as it pertains to opera, once I left Virginia State University, my alma mater, which is a historically Black college and university, I took a job as director of music at Covenant Presbyterian Church, which was a predominantly, if not all white, Presbyterian church. It was an honor to serve that church. But the point that I'm getting to, one of my choir members, that he was the opera buff, the late Dr. Jimmy Mason. He sang tenor in my choir, and he loved opera. And so I had never had been to a live opera up to that point. And so he would get all the season tickets for Virginia Opera. And it was, of course, some of the operas he wanted to go to, some of the ones he didn't want to go to. But guess what? The one that he didn't want to go to was Strauss's Electra.
Oh.
So I don't know if that's a good, first opera, but the whole spectacle of it and the drama, that was truly my first live opera experience, and I'm in
Wow.
so much indebted and gratitude to the late Dr. Mason. He passed a few years ago, but
Hmm.
definitely the fact that Electra, that was a heavy hitter
Uh-huh.
for my
I'm
first.
gonna say that's not our first opera. Don Giovanni, La Boheme.
I was in my Tuesday.
I mean, wow. Okay, you dove right in the deep end of the pool. You even start with.
Well, I didn't know. Of course, the Mozart operas, as you mentioned, I had already heard experience with those by listening to the great soloists sing them in recital, the arias in recital, and
Hmm.
things like that on the DVD. But Electra was my first live opera experience. And like you said, I definitely dove into the deep end of the pool.
Awesome. Wow. So that didn't scare you away, clearly. So after that, like, so you went to college, you studied voice, right? And did you do anything after college with the voice degree, or did you move more into like conducting, choral? Like, I'm just curious what your path was because everyone's is different.
I must go back because I've had a myriad of avenues, and I'll try to
Yeah,
keep
yeah.
it brief. But basically, as I mentioned, the church really formed the cornerstone of my musical interest. My mother, God rest her soul, she was very active in the church. But the church that I
Hmm.
sang in, they didn't do anthems, they didn't do spirituals. It was like knock down, drag out gospel, foot
Nice.
stomping, hand clapping, Hammond organ, and so forth. So basically, my experiences really came with classical music in high school. I had a fantastic high school choral director. Her name was Donna Arlen. I mean, she's still living and we're still in contact. But she was the one
Excellent.
that prepared me not for opera. She just prepared me for classical singing because my first aria from the
Hmm.
secular oratorio Simile, Where'er You Walk, won me my very first vocal competition. And from
Beautiful.
there, that graduated me from having the interest to wanting to study, music formally. But I must be honest, my interest wasn't necessarily in opera per se. I wanted to be a
Hmm.
vocal recitалist. You've heard all the great people like Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau and all those people like
Oh, yeah, yeah. Hmm.
leaders. And you may or may not know, I love early music. So I always thought I was gonna be on a
Uh-huh.
stage, a harpsichord, and viola da
Uh-huh.
gamba or something, singing,
Uh-huh.
Porto with harpsichords. That didn't work.
Hmm.
But to the crux of your question, yes, I did do a bunch of singing, but in conjunction with the singing, I also had a passion for sacred music with conducting. So I would say my focus
Hmm.
at Virginia State was on vocal performance. We
Hmm.
didn't have a big opera program at Virginia State, but we did have
Hmm.
opera workshop. And so in opera
Cool.
workshop, of course, you would workshop different scenes in the operas. And shout out to
Hmm.
Dr. Lisa Edwards-Burrs because she led that along with other instructors. But that's
Hmm.
where I got the experience about being, in the opera, knowing the character, the
Hmm.
synopsis, so forth and so on. But it was after Virginia State that I really concentrated even more on the realm of sacred music and being a conductor and an organist, and then later on the criticism.
Beautiful. Okay. Is something you want to say, Vita?
Yeah, I was just curious exactly the transition to becoming a critic because it's so important coming from the perspective of a singer to be able to then, I don't want to say criticize, but give you opinion and insight on someone else's performance.
Oh my goodness. I'm so glad you touched on that because a lot of people,
Hmm.
that's one of the first things they want to mention. So thank you for honing in on that. Well, as you mentioned, and Kofi also mentioned, I am a singer. I am an organist. I'm a trained musician. My undergrad is in voice, as we discussed, and my master's is in voice and organ. So when I go to
Hmm.
something critique, I generally go to things that really interest me, whether it's the
Hmm.
artist on the stage or the particular repertoire being performed. I
Hmm.
prepare myself and I already have those composers, that style period in my head. So when I
Hmm.
go, and I'm speaking personally for me, when I go to review a concert, whether it's opera, chamber music, choral,
Hmm.
I'm going to something that really is already resonating, in my psyche.
Hmm.
So I don't go to bash somebody's program because the same way that if I am not careful with my words, someone could come to my church where I'm the organist choir master and get on Facebook comment,
Hmm.
bash me in the comments. they can come to one of my recitals or one of my old recitals I've done and do the same thing. So I basically try to give what I would expect somebody to offer to me, but I don't want anybody to blow, smoke up my rear end
either.
I think it's a way that you can offer criticism. And if I may go on a little bit, when the pandemic first started, it was a lot of uproar, and the question was, should things be reviewed? Should there be music critics? But people have to understand too, just like the singers and all the musicians all around the world lost work, the music critic and the arts journalists lost work too. But sometimes I don't think it was viewed, the same way. But now we're moving, out of the pandemic. We see now that critics are being more welcome, and I'm glad, because it is not that you're being paid to write the review, but if you write for a publication or freelance, it is avenue for income as well. And many journalists and critics, myself included, have lost income during the pandemic. Well, so that was definitely a wonderful point. And like I said, I think that I come from a place of informing. For instance, if I'm reviewing a Baroque, piece, a trill in early Baroque might be a different approach in late Baroque. So it's just about being informed with anyone where they should be.
I really like a lot of two things you said. The fact that you prepare your ear and your mind and your psyche to be able to receive what the artist is putting out is a level of respect and appreciation for what artists do that I've literally never heard anyone ever articulate like you just did. So, I want to just give you incredible amounts of gratitude and acknowledge that, because that's huge.
Thank you.
So I want to, absolutely. And the second thing you said was just about the tone. And it goes back to a little bit of what we talked about before we started the broadcast, but tone is also a big thing. And it's something that I think so many people could learn a lot about in figuring out how to say what you want to say without being toxic or without being abrasive, and, creating this very negative sort of feedback loop that starts once, you kick things off on the wrong foot. So, thank you for saying that and articulating that. And if, there are any younger people in their career, or people who have had troubles in their career, sometimes it's about how they communicate, and it's a huge part of success in life. So thank you also for just speaking about that.
It's also a journey.
Wait, hello? Oh no, I think we lost her. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
You can. Okay. Are you back, Vita?
You hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. We lost you for a good 15 seconds or so. Shoot. Okay. We'll have to regroup once our connection's back. But, I'm going to just pivot into the origin story of how you and I met. So for the audience, it's a very interesting story. We were, Vita and I were doing an opera in Maryland. We were doing The Tsar's Bride, Rimsky-Korsakov, with Bel Cantanti Opera. And we were reaching out to people in the area who are, known critics and, connoisseurs in the industry, to invite them so they could see this performance, because Tsar's Bride hasn't been done in a very, very long time. And so it was just a great opportunity to do that. So Patrick was gracious enough to respond and to actually attend the performance. So that's how we met. So I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add to that, Patrick, but
I do.
we appreciate you.
I do. Kofi, it just did my heart glad. And I just want to say, I know you asked me to say this, but I think it's very important that artists, and even though I'm not an active artist, but I do have a vested interest in this enterprise, I think it's very important that you support one another, you support your colleagues, because, you can't expect that every time you're on the stage that you expect the support, but you don't ever yield that same fruit. So I just want to say to you, I was so happy to see you in particular there, and it was just the manner and the way you reached out. We were talking before we went live. It was the way that in which you reached out. You were so professional, and of course, all of the like my mother would say, all of the standing on formality. Of course, that died down, eventually. But it was just the approach, and you enlightened me because I had never attended an opera by Rimsky-Korsakov. The only thing I remembered about Rimsky-Korsakov when I was in high school, the processional was his big piece called The Procession of Nobles. And so it enlightened me. So thank you.
Cool. Hey, sharing is caring, as they say, right? So yeah, it was really lovely that you actually came through, and we took a couple of pictures. I got to find those pictures and we can share them in a second. But yeah, I think it's important for people to actually make the effort to reach out. And one part of my background that people might not know is I work in sales. I work in tech sales, so it's business to business. The formality and the professionalism is very much something I have to do on a regular basis, and that's definitely informed the way in which I communicate and talk to people generally. But I would definitely, as a unsolicited advice, I would say it's really important to make those efforts and reach out to people that you don't know and try to make those connections, because that's how you build these relationships that last a lifetime, and friendships that have started with a conversation at a airplane, a terminal, or just some random email you send out, right? It's really a beautiful thing. So I think I definitely strongly encourage people to do a lot more of that, because it really can change your life.
Indeed.
So let's pivot a little bit. One thing that is a common thread with everyone I talk to in the podcast is the idea of the role model, the mentor, the person who is a very impactful. You've already mentioned two people that you really look up to, but I'm curious, who are some others that really were impactful in your life, in your musical life specifically?
Oh my goodness, Kofi.
You're like, do I have 3 hours?
There's so many, but the main one, I mentioned my high school music teacher, but I must talk about the main one. Matter of fact, I had the opportunity to interview my main mentor. His name is Dr. James F. Peake Jr. And Dr. Peake, every day after school, he was the minister of music at the time at West End Baptist Church in my hometown, Petersburg. And so after school, in high school, I will always go to his office. And every time that I left that office, he always gave me a recording of a major work, whether it was an opera, whether it was disc of great recitals like Kathleen Battle or Dave Pierre-Chicano, these people. So that was ongoing every day after school. But the full circle moment happened on yesterday. Some of you may recall, if you follow my work, I interviewed the great mezzo soprano Jennifer Lamour. And it was all those years ago that he gave me a disc of excerpts of Handel's Julius Caesar. It was just excerpts. And Jennifer Lamour, of course, Atlanta-born, world-renowned mezzo. But the point that I'm making is, remember now, my mentor gave me a disc of excerpts. Yesterday, when I went to the CD Depot, the store I mentioned to you, I found the whole recording. And to see at the top of the list, I was like, wow, I wouldn't have even known who Jennifer Lamour was if it had not been for Dr. James F. Peake Jr. And Dr. Peake, again, he was a very seminal figure that really, I would say, really nurtured my love for classical music. But he was, I would say, my most important mentor. And then, of course, at Virginia State University, I would be remiss if I did not mention Johnnella L. Edmonds, who is the director of choral activities at the institution. And I have the privilege of teaching on the adjunct faculty at Virginia State and serving under her tutelage. So I know I mentioned a few, but I would say those are the major mentors that I've experienced.
That's awesome. Yeah, Vita, you have a couple of stories about that too. I think it'd be awesome if you share, but it is a consistent thread across time, across industries, of anyone that has achieved a high level, that they had someone that, imparted their knowledge and their expertise. So yeah, Vita, go ahead. Tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I don't want to take away the time from Patrick. It's just
No, please.
one thing that you said is so important. You wouldn't have known about Jennifer Larmore singing, and she's fantastic. She's a wonderful mezzo, but it's only an example of how important it is to listen to great singing, to listen to what is considered to be the golden age of singing. And of course, Jennifer is not from that time frame, but
I'm sorry. Are you hearing her, or did you lose her too?
Oh, I lost her.
But
she was
her?
the golden age of singing, sort of like Beverly Seals or Renata Tebaldi, people like that, the golden age.
Yeah, I mean, some of the people in the background with your collection there.
Yeah, Elizabeth Schwarzkopf, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, I love Beverly Seals and of course Miss Price. But yeah, I think that's where she left off, the golden age of singing.
Amen. Yeah, as I was saying before, it is such an important part of this tradition, right? To have, and even if you look at even just voice teaching, a lot of it was just an oral tradition, right? And some of it was documented, but I think the vast majority of it wasn't documented, and we have remnants of that, thankfully. So, yeah, it's also, I think the point she was making is that there are so many great, fantastic singers that unfortunately the world doesn't get to hear, because it seems as if there's limited amounts of limelight, right? Where there aren't enough opportunities for everyone to get seen on the biggest stages, and someone like Jennifer Larmore is, I'm sure, a fantastic singer that I haven't heard. And I think that's one of the sad things, about the business.
Well, you must go on YouTube and listen to her. Just put a lot more in your handle. But of course, she's on the, I would say she's still singing, don't get me wrong. But as you mentioned, not as prominently as now. And I do want to make a point that you kind of lean towards, it is what I would speak for me, personally for me. It's very frustrating sometimes when you see the same singers who are enjoying the limelight being recycled over and over and over again. When you do, as you mentioned, you do have other singers who are very talented, but because whatever the case may be, they might not have high-powered management, they might not have a high-powered publicist, so forth and so on. They don't get that same attention that they rightly deserve. So I'm thinking, just. Yeah, I could talk about that on the OS. I better stop.
No worries. We'd love for you to carry on, but there's a lot of other things we're going to ask you, because we think you have some very valuable perspective to share. One question that Vita was hoping to ask you was, given that mentorship is kind of important, I know that in the earlier, I think it was last year actually, at one point you had put together a program where you wanted to mentor some singers. Can you tell us what you're doing currently, what services you're offering, and how you're kind of engaged in the singing and music community in general, on the mentorship level, and like things you're doing in services in that angle?
Well, Reaching for Excellence, and I'm honored that you're a part of that pilot. As you can imagine, as things really start going in a myriad of directions, I had to kind of table that from the way I wanted to do, where I would go live all the time and bring people on. And it's more or less any of those people who are a part of that cohort, they can reach out to me. Excuse me. They can reach out to me directly. And if it's different things they want to talk about, whether it's, as I mentioned, the PR angle, if it's really honing your voice. And when I say voice, I mean how you present yourself, your tone and things like that. So it's more or less transition, more or less all of the members of that cohort, which is quite a few, and it's not just opera singers, it's jazz musicians and so forth and so on, but it's more of a direct channel as opposed to it being a big Overture or Facebook, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
So if anybody's interested in that, you can definitely reach out to me at Patrick D. McCoy at patrickdmccoy.com, and I'll be glad to assist you in that.
Excellent. So I'm just throwing your contact information down there, folks. Contact Patrick. He is incredible. He has a lot of knowledge, a lot of expertise. So reach out to him so he can help you level up your career, step up your game, as some might say. If you're looking for Patrick on the socials, you can find him on Instagram and on Facebook and on Twitter. You can find all three of his handles right there, and you can easily get in touch. So thank you for, once again, making time for this conversation. And I'm glad to see there are a few people in here. A quick comment here. Vita says, sorry for the technical difficulties. Yeah, you have a podcast as well. How do you decide what artists to support through your work? I guess, how do you choose who you talk to?
I must say, and that's great. That's a great question because, in the beginning, so many things happened. But let's talk about the podcast. The podcast originally started as a true bona fide podcast before anybody was even interviewing opera singers, and in particular, Black opera singers. It was on Blog Talk Radio, and that podcast was about 11 years ago. But what I found that doing, this word that we tend to use a lot, pivot, I found that when the pandemic hit, I had to find a way to repurpose everything I had already done. I had already interviewed Leona Mitchell, Denise Graves, Christine Brewer, the list goes on and on and on. So I had already basically interviewed these people many years ago, like 10 years ago, not to take anything away from anybody else's platforms that got the opportunity to elevate it to the video component. But my podcast, Across the Arts, originally started out as a bona fide audio thing. So I found that during the pandemic, I said, hey, I need to repurpose all of these interviews now. And I have to also still be relevant in this enterprise. So what I did was I discovered how you could use Zoom and stream Zoom and share the screen, and then you could play the audio. So that's exactly what I did. I went back in my archives and started playing. And shout out to Ophalie Graham. Happy birthday, because she was one of my first interviews on the Opera Diva series. And so, so what I used to do, it was a true podcast. So during the pandemic, I started streaming these interviews live. So a lot of people there jump on. Of course, I let people know that it's going into the archives, but they even got more attention because they were streamed. Most people didn't even know what a Blog Talk Radio was, but because of the pandemic, that made me be able to bring it out to the forefront. And then finally, I myself graduated to the video interviews. So now I was able to take my interviews to another level with the internet, with the video component, much like we're doing today for DictionBuddy.
Excellent. Yeah, it's the pandemic. I was actually going to ask you a little bit about how you modified and changed and pivoted your practices during COVID and since COVID, but the video discussions and interviews that we have, like we're having today, I think have really created a new opportunity for all of us to engage in a interesting way and to archive a lot of conversations that historically just haven't been easy to archive. Like we had one of these interviews with our voice teacher, Greta Damrow, who's another amazing singer, but didn't have the same notoriety as many of the singers we know today. And so, not just telling her story, we played some clips of her, and she espoused a little bit of the principles she believes in as a voice teacher. I think that's critically important for especially people who are older in the 70s and 80s. Another gentleman, Tasso, who's in the DC area, we interviewed as well. So really key, and it's really awesome that you've been doing that. Blog Talk Radio is actually, it was one of the things I started listening to a long time ago. I found a couple of shows I really enjoyed, and that was like the platform for it. But now, YouTube is here, Facebook and all that. So.
And if you're someone who has a MacBook or Apple, all of my podcasts are also, they migrate the podcast, to that platform as well. So you can definitely listen to it, as a podcast. But I want to speak to your point very quickly. That's something, we've all had to pivot. And the idea of repurposing your archive, I think that's vital because you can play it at another time and stream it live as if, it's happening at that moment. And that gets more volume to your interview and so forth.
Amen. Yeah, I think it also, it makes your content, it fills out any gaps in content you might have, and you can use a drip campaign and like cut clips of it and use that on a weekly basis. And, that content strategy is also something that it seems the classical business isn't doing that much. And it would be a great thing, I think, if people could adopt that, because pop singers do that a lot. If people that sing other genres of music use these platforms in a much more elaborate and mature fashion than we have so far. So, I think it's very smart for you to do that.
But I think in our arena, we're wearing so many hats. You're teaching at the university, you're a vocal coach, you're at the church at the board. I mean, if I had the big bucks, I would have the big graphic designer and the overlay and all of that. But until then, the message is getting out. So you definitely hit a valid point.
Yeah. So we do what we can while we can. So I've read that you've done reviews for a number of different publications. How did you open those doors to start writing for some of these publications?
Hardship. And I'm gonna tell you this. I've been quoted on many interviews because I have to acknowledge that, and I'll try to give you the Clips Notes version. But basically, when I moved here, I was teaching public school. It wasn't for me. I love my babies, love all my kids, shout out to all my former students. But when I was doing that, it just going back to the musical experiences I had even in my hometown and the recordings that I heard, I didn't necessarily want to be in the classroom. And so I didn't have the interest or the motivation to finish what you call a provisional license. I don't know if you're familiar with public school teacher or anybody out there. Basically, if you have a performance degree, my degree is in performance, not education. So they give you an amount of time to finish your provisional requirements. But if you don't meet those requirements, you get knocked back down to being like a substitute teacher on a regular basis. So basically, as you can imagine, the income was reduced and all of that. So I continued to substitute teach, but what happened was I ended up getting a part-time job, believe it or not, at the Kennedy Center. And guess what Patrick McCoy was doing at the Kennedy Center? This was way when I first moved here. I was working in a division of the Kennedy Center called Instant Charge. Instant Charge would be where the people would call in for performances and so on and so on. I would sell the ticket. But what endeared me to the people was the fact that I knew the repertoire. And if somebody was going to hear a cellist and they wanted to know how the cellist was going to bow or what direction, I could tell them where to sit from the stage. Or if somebody is interested in a recital, I would just recommend those things. So basically, to kind of push ahead with this, so when I was at the Kennedy Center, I said, well, hey, if I'm at the Kennedy Center, seeing all these performances, got my finger on the pulse, why not write about these things? And so I had that in my head. And I don't know whether this was the universe or what, but basically what happened was I got a random email. I was renting a room at the time, believe it or not, because as I mentioned, as the income changed, so did
you gotta adjust to your lifestyle.
You gotta do what you gotta do. So I was in this room, and as you will find, and this is to anybody out here, you will find that when your income change, your friend circle will change too. You realize that people are not necessarily your friend, okay? And so I was in this room. The only thing I could do was come home and get on my computer. I got a random email from this publication called Examiner.com. And many people hear me talk about this because Examiner.com is like the distant cousin that you don't write, that you don't invite to the family reunion. So there is the paper, The Examiner, and then you have online publication. But they had a column called the Kennedy Center Examiner, not affiliated with the Kennedy Center, but they just wanted coverage of those events. So basically, in a nutshell, I started writing this column. My first piece that I wrote was with the Washington Chorus. With the Washington Chorus. And I reached out to them and said, hey, I would love to review your Mozart Requiem. Shout out to Julian Wagner. He was the conductor at the time. And Kofi, what was amazing was that when I wrote the review, this is when Facebook really started blossoming. The Washington Chorus posted that review. And then I said, oh, well, if I can reach out to the Washington Post, why not reach out to mostly every single performing arts organization in Washington? Because mind you, I did, try to get my work or get engaged by other papers, but I must shout the Afro American because I did write for them. Excuse me.
Sure.
I did write for them in print, so they were definitely one of my first publications as well. But I think the whole idea when I finally learned that, hey, I didn't need necessarily the validation of a publication per se. So I had already had my own platform, and that's how it blossomed. And then from there, led into Washington Life magazine, which I would consider like the capstone of my writing, because that was where Perfect Pitch, my print column for Washington Life magazine, which is the big luxury magazine here in Washington. So they gave me my own column called Perfect Pitch, and I interviewed major luminaries in print for that. I started out with Joshua Bell, followed by Renee Fleming and Denise Graves, and then on and on. So then, of course, writing for a major publication such as Washington Life magazine, that catapulted me, to the Washington Post, Early Music America, Classical Voice North America, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Oh, you definitely did. That's really awesome. You opened the door, you walked us all the way through. So that's exactly what I wanted to hear.
A lot of times people think, don't get me wrong. In some respects, validation is wonderful. Don't get me wrong, but you can't get to the point that who you are as an artist, who you are as a writer, comes from the vein of just validation. As I always create your own space.
I agree. I think that's what I think is often lost is this the fact that who you are as an artist has to be the primary thing that you create, and what that means in and of itself is a whole 4-hour conversation of who you are as an artist. But then what that artist is capable of doing in the marketplace of the performing arts in general, it has its own appeal, right? Some people have that mass appeal and they're going to have the big international career. What you have as an artist might not have that. And I think being okay with that allows you to create the best art you can, being true to who you are. And validation is a key part of anyone's career. I mean, in sales, like validation is hitting your quota and getting promoted, right, and making those President's Club or whatever it is, right. Every industry has that, and it's necessary to collect a few of those accolades, because that it's not just because it is valuable for other people to see. It's valuable for yourself as well, so that when you present yourself to others, you can kind of signal to them the pedigree that you have as an artist, in a sense, right?
You're right.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing though, because it's a lot, as you said. I mean, with Jennifer Lamour, incredible singer. I haven't had the privilege of hearing her, and there's probably countless other singers, right, who are excellent, but because they don't have that household name, we may not have heard them on record, So it's a little bit of a balance, right?
There's also a generation gap too, because I mean, let's be clear, Jennifer Lamour is a world-renowned singer, and I'm not, I understand, so of course you may be in tune, right, with Lawrence Bradley or some of the younger singers singing right now. So I would encourage people just to investigate the generations. That's all.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. That's my boo-boo on that one.
No, it's a learning experience.
Yes. Well said. I appreciate that. So yeah, it's a very tricky thing. So can you walk me through any experiences you've had with an artist who you reviewed earlier in the career and then they blew up and now they're doing very well? I'm actually curious if there are any stories of people you can think of.
I must say, I can't say that I've had that, because all of the artists that I would say that I have reviewed, they have been, established singers. Of course, everybody knows I adore Kathleen Battle, and I've reviewed so many content, but I can't really review her programs now because everybody knows that I'm a fanboy. I'm a fanboy.
Yeah.
But I will say that the artists that probably that I had the opportunity when I was first on this journey. They were already huge, but I think they're gargantuan now. And that is the the amazing tenor, Lawrence Braley. And I'm glad that I have the privilege to call him Larry. But Lawrence, when he first started, I heard a lot of his early recitals live in Washington. And that was because of a wonderful patron of the arts, Mrs. Mame Hope, who is responsible for me even being here in the Washington area. And so she was on all the boards, Vocal Arts DC, Washington Concert Opera, et cetera, et cetera. And so she had entree to all of these spaces. Black regal woman here in Washington. But Mrs. Hope was the one that provided that entree. And Lawrence Braley was the person who I ended up, writing a lot of reviews, very, very objective reviews. The friendship, I would say, came later. And also, on Blog Talk Radio, I would say he was one of the first opera singers of note that I interviewed among many others. So I would say Lawrence Braley would be the capstone in terms of the person that I've seen my career graduate in terms of the reviews.
Awesome. Thanks for that. That's really it's exciting stuff to see a career, just take off and move into a different category and level of success. So
yeah,
cool to see that. And then to get a friendship out of that too, that's pretty awesome. So I mean, no one needs to announce what happened last year. If you had, let's say, a young singer you're mentoring, this is actually a question that Vita has put out, which is, how would you advise them to navigate now that things are moving out of the pandemic a little bit? Well, out of the pandemic, who knows what's ultimately going to happen, but what advice would you give a singer, let's say you were mentoring?
I would say that you want to make sure that you keep your social media presence above board. It's nothing wrong with speaking your voice, being true to yourself. But as you and I touched on before, it's a matter of tone, it's a matter of deportment, and it's a matter of the way that you interact. So I would say the social media, considering that even though we are going back out into the world, even myself, as I mentioned, I've curtailed a lot of my reviewing because there haven't been the opportunity, but now things are opening up. But as it pertains to the singers and the various aspects of performing arts, as you know, we're going to be doing this hybrid model where you're going to be doing not only on the stage, but these things are going to be streamed. So I would say that you have to make sure that everything that you do, whether it's in social media, your personal page, that it truly speaks to how you want to be perceived.
Excellent. Yeah, that is that PR expertise, right? Speaking, I think, very, very clearly to the audience, right?
But I do want to say that, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I do want to say you don't want to deny your voice. And when I say voice, your inner voice, when it comes to, I mean, we've had so many things to go on that we can't turn a blind eye to Breonna Taylor or George Floyd, any of these things that happen. So, and I know a lot of people, they kind of shy away from that. But again, I think there is just a way that you communicate these things. Because at the end of the day, when things open up, people still have these things in their head. And whether people want to admit it or not, these thoughts are still back there. So,
amen. Yeah, I think the people's memories are long, and people always remember how you made them feel. So if you're careless and clumsy with your tone and disrespectful or condescending or abrasive unnecessarily, it does have an effect. And there are great athletes, there are great performers, entertainers, and even scientists. There's actually I can tell a little story about a guy called Arthur Semmelweis. Actually, he was the person who discovered essentially germ theory was he made a big contribution to that, and he was correct in that he understood why things were happening. He worked in a maternity ward, and many of the women were dying. And it was because the doctors were going from, one woman to another with the bloody hands of the placenta and all that, not washing their hands, and just going to another pregnant woman and delivering the baby. And then like half the women were dying. So he figured out that, hey, we should be washing our hands with disinfectant in between these operations. And he was correct. But unfortunately, the way that he communicated it was so abrasive and accusatory and disrespectful, and it just created this antagonism towards him, and it restricted his degree of success in the field. I don't think it should have been the case. So I'm very objective, and I try to just separate and take don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. But you don't want to expect too much of people in general. I mean, you're dealing with large, like the largest society, right? So what you're saying, I think, is very wise. Be mindful of your tone, and also it's not even just about your tone on issues of social and cultural issues. I think it's also about the content you put out as a singer. Whatever you put out video wise has to reflect well, right, on you. It has to be some of the best you're doing, and I think that's wiser than putting your practice sessions out in public. I think it's better to put out the best of you all the time. Would you agree with that? Or would you? Because I've seen people do different things. Everyone's different.
I do. And I think that was some of the hesitancy, as we talked about early on, about the whole role of the critic during the pandemic. Because, of course, in the beginning, you didn't have the microphones. You didn't have the ring light. Shout out to Robin. She sent me the first ring light. So you didn't have all these things. So what would I look like, really dogging you out because the sound's not good or the lighting is not good? So that's to your point.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, so using wisdom, I think, is the fundamental thread through all of this. So yeah, that's I think a good nugget that people can take away from the conversation. We've gone over how people can get in touch with you, which is finding you on socials, but also let me find the others. That your website is here for people to see in case they're not aware how to.
If I may, Kofi,
sure.
I want to go back. Even before the pandemic, I was in the throes about to review Opera Lafayette's production of Leonore, and if some of the listeners might know that Leonore is the earlier version of Beethoven's Fidelio. And so that was something that I was in the mix of doing before. And of course, my last opera that I got the chance to actually hear was, of course, Janae Bridges in Carmen with Washington National Opera. So, of course, that was my last thing. And I just hope that I get some more opportunities. But I must shout out, some of our African-American composers who have gotten a little bit of limelight, and their works have been amplified during this season as well. Nikiria Okoye, happy birthday. Her Harriet Tubman. It was one of, Terrence Blanchard, Fire Shut Up in My Bones, and of course, Blue by Tasman. I could go on and on, but we have not heard this litany of works by African-American composers. Of course, you heard of Tremadisha, Scott Joplin, and even yesterday mention of Clarence Cameron White's Owanga. But, the point that I'm making here is that the pandemic has brought forth a lot of great things in the realm of opera.
Agreed. Yeah, it's not all bad. And I mean, of course, I'd rather have done without it, but whatever cards you're dealt in life, like option B for sure, no pandemic, I'd vote for that. But seeing it as it has happened, and we did have to deal with it and confront it, I'm actually really impressed with the amount of really incredible work, the creativity, the ingenuity, innovation, and the collaborations that I'm seeing that just haven't happened before, and also the adoption of and using technology in ways that people haven't before. I think it's really been a game changer in a lot of ways. So hopefully we don't need another pandemic to move us, give us a quantum leap forward, but we do what we can. We have a question here from Gary. Did you get the opportunity to see the unforgettable Jesse Norman recital?
I did not, but I had a memorable experience with the late Jessie Norman that I must share since you brought up. You can't bring her up and I not talk about this. My first major, I would say, event when I was with Washington Life magazine, I got invited to this wonderful reception. It was in her honor. It was at the Hayes Adam Hotel here in Washington, and she was being honored at that time by the Washington Performing Arts Society. It was a wonderful event. Audrey McDonald was there, who I also interviewed for Washington Life. But I got to the hotel very early, And I'm thinking I'm getting there early because the people are setting up the glassware, the tables, and all that.
Mhm.
And so when I came through the hall, so did Ms. Norman. And you could have bought me for a penny. It was amazing. I mean, everything that people imagine, like she just floated into the room. She floated into the room and she was so gracious. She was so wonderful and warm. And I asked her, could I take a picture with her? Because we was like the first ones there. Now, my
Mhm.
friend who was the photographer, Chris Birch, I asked him, I said, could you take this picture for me? And I
Mhm.
kind of, insulted him like any other photographer. I handed him my cell phone. So he went ahead and yeah, he went ahead and obliged, and he took the picture. He
Yeah.
said, he said, Patrick, he said, but you must have a true picture. So then we
Mm,
posed for a formal portrait. And that's in my other,
beautiful.
people who watch my other lives, you see all my other pictures on the
Yeah.
wall. But that was the most memorable experience. But the other part of that was when Audrey McDonald sang in tribute to her, she bowed before Miss Norman's feet. And then, of
Wow.
course, the very last time I saw Ms. Norman was at her talk at the Library of Congress. And then
Mhm.
shortly thereafter, the rest is that, but she's greatly missed. But so, no, I could go to her in recital on YouTube and all my recordings.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, I never had the privilege of seeing many of the greats. I mean, I grew up on an early diet of Paul Robeson, and my dad, is the one who introduced me to him. And oh man, what an incredible human being! I mean, what he accomplished at a time when being black was, I mean, it's just I can't believe he did what he did, and he was so bold and so brave and overcame all those obstacles to become a professional athlete, a lawyer, Ivy League trained, Shakespearean actor, singer, activist. I mean, it's just how many lives would the average person need to do one of those things? And he did it all in one. But yeah, I think it's wonderful that we have that tradition of these giants, right? The Jesse Normans, the Paul Robesons, Robert McFerrins, the Leontine Prices. I mean, the Marian Andersons. It goes on, and it's a wonderful testament to this spirit of overcoming, right, and just excelling and chasing. Yeah, incredible. So yeah, I'm very thankful that we've had this conversation and we're able to talk about these things because this is how we keep these traditions and the memory of these great people alive. And I think you've imparted a lot of great wisdom to people that I think need to hear some of this information, which is it's important to be mindful of where we are in society today, where we are with the different resources that are available to us, and we should utilize them judiciously. Patrick is very, very, very well versed in the PR field. He has an incredible ear as a critic, so he can be someone that can really help you level up in your career. So I strongly encourage anyone that's tuning in that's trying to find your way, reach out to Patrick, send him an email. Here's his email address. Find him on socials, reach out. He's very accessible, very friendly, as you can see. So we hope that you'll take advantage of the opportunity to have a conversation with Patrick. I've had a tremendous time, a really great time talking to you and learning more about you. And I hope that we have the opportunity to do this more often. So is there anything else you'd like to say to the audience before we wrap up today?
Yes, yes, yes. I could talk all day long, but the main thing I want to say, we also still have to think about some of our other marginalized groups in opera in terms of
Mm-hmm.
composers. I think about the
Sure.
Asian community with Du Yun, who
Mm-hmm.
she wrote the opera Angel's Bone, and then of course, as I
Mm-hmm.
already mentioned, Nakuru Okoye, who is really enjoying um, some even more notoriety, I should say, in terms
Cool.
of being a Black composer. But of course, you may
Mm-hmm.
have seen our young composer, shout out to Dave Ragler. He wrote this opera called One Vote One, and that's the first piece, Kofi, that I even ventured to review. Because as
Mm-hmm.
we talked about, a
During
lot
the
of people are
pandemic?
skeptical. Yeah, so
Got
I
it.
actually watched it. They sent me a digital version. I reviewed it and published that. And then you have a lot of stuff coming up that I'm excited about.
Mhm.
Composers
Awesome.
like Leslie Burrs and things like that. So the main thing that I'm trying to get to is a whole big world of opera
Yeah.
out here, and I hope
Yes.
that we can consider to
Mhm.
explore the full palette of this great
Mhm.
opera.
Amen. Amen. Yeah, guys, if you want to, guys and gals, everyone, if you want to find out what's happening in the opera business, new and interesting composers of all different kinds, please follow Patrick, get on his newsletter, get on his socials. He posts a lot, so you won't miss anything. If you follow Patrick, you're gonna get everything you need basically to find out what's happening in the opera world with composers of color, people that are doing new and interesting things. So definitely jump on and get with the program. Okay. All right, folks. Well, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate you tuning in. We are DictionBuddy, and our mission, as I said before, is to make the songs of the world more accessible to everyone so everyone can learn them and pay them the just respect they're due. So have a wonderful rest of your Sunday. Thank you for tuning in. And Patrick, it's been a pleasure. We'll talk again soon. Have a good
Thank
day.
you.
Thank you.